Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into forest ecology.
Oh, yeah.
And not just,
Right.
like identifying trees, but like
Right, yeah.
complex relationships.
The nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
So,
So it's more than just a collection of trees, right? It's a whole system,
yeah, the system.
a complex adaptive system. So it's always...
So where do we even begin with that?
Well, luckily, Chapter 2 of your source material kind of gives us a framework.
Okay.
We can delve into the structure of these ecosystems.
Okay.
Explore the biodiversity, trace how energy flows, how
Yeah.
the nutrients cycle.
Okay.
And then finally, we'll talk about
Yeah.
succession and change.
Oh, cool. So
Yeah.
like if we were to step into a forest,
Yeah.
what would we be looking for?
Well, first, you'd see all the trees.
Oh, okay.
You know,
the canopy, like
Yeah.
reaching for the light.
It's like the control center of the forest.
Oh, wow.
So it captures the sunlight, and then everything below is influenced by that.
So it's like prime real estate up there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And then below that, you have what we call the subcanopy,
Okay.
where you have like smaller trees and younger saplings.
So they're competing to get,
They're all trying to reach the top.
wow. So it's like a race to the top?
Yeah, it is. And then below that, you have the understory.
The understory. Okay.
Which is
so
some-
like shrubs and stuff.
Shrubs, ferns, all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And then finally, you have the forest floor.
In the ground.
Yeah, it's like the foundation. It's where all the decomposition happens.
Right. So like the leaves fall down there.
Yeah, and the wood decomposes.
Right. All that stuff.
It's like nature's recycling system.
So it's like a bustling city down there.
Yeah, it's like a hidden world.
So then all of that like structure stuff that we were talking about,
Right.
that kind of ties into like,
It ties into the biodiversity.
yeah.
The different layers support different types of organisms.
So it's like the more layers,
Yeah, the more layers,
the more biodiversity.
the more biodiversity.
Okay.
Yeah. And then,
I mean, it's mind-boggling to me how many species there are.
I know, it's...
Like
yeah.
in a forest, it's just,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not just about the numbers. It's
Yeah.
about how those species all interact.
okay,
And it's about the resilience that it creates for the ecosystem.
okay.
So, like, if one species struggles,
Right.
the others can kind of fill in.
Right, okay.
And then you have what we call keystone species.
Keystone species, okay, I've heard of those.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that have a big impact.
They have a disproportionately large impact.
Right, like compared to how many there are.
Exactly.
And like if you took them away,
If you took them out,
the whole thing would fall apart.
yeah, the ecosystem could collapse.
So like an example,
A good example is beavers.
beavers.
They build dams,
Right,
and those dams create wetlands,
yeah.
and that affects the water flow and the habitat for other species.
So they're like these tiny little architects.
Yeah, they're like ecosystem engineers.
Wow.
But then with all these species,
Right.
you have all kinds of interactions.
Wow.
You have competition,
Like for food and stuff?
yeah, for resources,
What?
water, sunlight, nutrients,
Okay.
and then you have predation.
Okay, so that's where things get a little more.
Yeah, a little more intense,
Yeah.
predator and prey,
Right.
keeping populations in check. And
Oh,
then
yeah.
you have symbiosis.
Symbiosis. Okay, so that's where they work together
Yeah, it's where they work together.
instead of compete.
Yeah, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, what's an example of
A
that?
great example is the relationship between mycorrhizal fungi
Fungi.
and trees.
Okay.
So these fungi form these underground networks,
Okay.
and they connect to the roots of trees.
Wow. So they're sharing.
Yeah, they're exchanging nutrients.
Oh, wow. So it's like a trading system.
Yeah, it's like a mutually beneficial relationship.
So what do they trade?
So the fungi are really good at extracting nutrients from the soil,
Okay.
like phosphorus and nitrogen,
Yeah.
and they give those to the trees.
Okay.
And in return, the trees give the fungi sugars.
Right. From photosynthesis.
Exactly.
Wow. So it's like they both need each other.
Yeah, they both benefit.
Wow. That's amazing. Okay. So we've talked about the structure.
Right.
We've talked about the biodiversity.
Yeah.
All of these relationships.
Right.
It's all fueled somehow.
Well, yeah, that brings us to the flow of energy
Okay.
through the forest.
Okay.
And it all starts with the sun.
Okay.
It's the driving force.
Wow.
So the plants capture that sunlight
Okay.
through photosynthesis.
Right.
They're like nature's solar panels.
Right.
They convert that light energy
Okay.
into a form that can be used by the rest of the ecosystem.
So then how does it spread?
Well, it travels up the food chain.
The food chain.
Yeah, so you have the herbivores.
Like deer.
Yeah, deer, rabbits, insects.
Okay.
They consume the plants, and then they get the energy.
So they get it secondhand.
Yeah, but it all originates from the sun.
Okay.
And they're what we call the primary consumers.
Primary consumers, okay.
And then you have the predators.
Right.
Like wolves and mountain lions.
Okay.
They feed on the herbivores.
Right.
So they're getting energy indirectly from the plants.
Okay, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's this fascinating chain of connections.
It's like a relay race,
Yeah.
passing the energy.
Exactly. And we refer to these different levels as trophic levels.
Trophic levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's helpful to think of it like a pyramid
Sure.
with plants at the base,
Okay.
then the herbivores in the middle,
Hmm.
and then the predators at the top.
Okay, a pyramid of energy. I like that.
Yeah.
So the higher up you go,
Right.
the further away you are from the sun.
Yeah. And the energy actually diminishes as it moves up the trophic levels.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, it's not actually loss,
Oh.
but it's transformed into less usable forms.
Less usable form.
A heat.
Oh, so it's like a leaky pipeline or something.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
So how come it's only like
Well,
10% or something that makes it to the next level?
yeah, it's because all those life processes,
Yeah.
like movement and digestion,
Mm-hmm.
they require energy.
Right.
So only about 10%.
The 10% rule.
Yeah, the 10% rule.
Right.
So if a plant captures 100 units of energy,
Okay.
a deer eating that plant might only gain 10,
Okay.
and then a wolf eating the deer might only get 1.
Wow. So it's like a big drop off.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Okay. So,
And that's also why you tend to see fewer predators.
right, because there's less energy?
Yeah, less energy to support them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So the energy's flowing through,
Right.
transforming, diminishing.
Yeah.
What about the nutrients, though?
Oh, yeah. Nutrients are super important.
Right, because those are like the building blocks.
Yeah, the building blocks of life.
But those are recycled, right?
They are constantly recycled.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, it all starts with decomposition.
Decomposition.
It's like nature's recycling program.
Okay.
So when plants and animals die,
Yeah.
decomposers like bacteria and fungi
Okay.
get to work.
So they break it all down.
They break it all down.
Okay.
And then they release those nutrients back into the soil.
So it's like composting, but on a bigger scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. And then the plants can take those nutrients up again.
Exactly. And it starts all over.
That's so cool. It's a closed loop.
It's a beautiful system.
But forests aren't static, are they?
No, they're constantly changing.
So how do we account for that?
Well, that's what we call ecological succession.
Succession. Okay.
It's the gradual process of change
Okay.
in a forest's species composition
Okay. Over time.
over time.
So it's like the forest's life story.
Exactly.
What's the beginning of the story look like?
Well, imagine a bare patch of land.
Okay.
Like after a volcanic eruption or a landslide,
Okay.
that's where primary succession begins.
Primary succession.
Yeah. And it starts with these really hardy pioneer species,
Pioneer species.
like lichens and moss.
Lichens and mosses. Okay.
They colonize that bare landscape.
So they're tough.
Yeah, they're really tough. And they
Yeah.
actually break down rocks.
Break down rocks.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they create a thin layer of soil.
Wow. So they're like the first step.
Yeah, they're like the trailblazers.
Wow. Okay. So what happens next?
Well, over time,
Yeah.
grasses and shrubs start to grow.
Okay.
And then eventually, fast-growing trees.
Like pines.
Yeah, pines or birches.
Okay.
And then you have a young forest.
Wow. So it's like a buildup.
Yeah, it's a gradual process.
Okay.
And each stage sets the stage for the next.
So is there an end point to this story?
Well, we call the final stage a climax community.
A climax community.
Yeah.
Like,
It's a relatively stable state,
okay.
and it might be a dense, mature forest
Okay.
dominated by slower growing,
Right.
shade-tolerant trees.
Like what kind of trees?
Like oaks or maple. Oaks, maples. Okay, so it's reached maturity,
Yeah.
but does that mean it stops changing?
Well, not necessarily.
Oh.
Even climax communities can experience change
Okay.
due to disturbances.
Disturbances like what?
Like fires,
Fires? Oh, yeah.
storms, or
Yeah.
even long-term environmental shifts.
Okay, so it's like a dynamic equilibrium.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Okay.
So the forest is always adapting
Right.
and responding to change.
What about those disturbances, though?
Yeah,
Like you mentioned fire.
right.
That sounds bad.
Well, it can seem destructive,
Right.
but fire can actually be beneficial.
Beneficial. How?
Well, it clears out dead wood
Okay.
and underbrush,
Mm-hmm.
and it creates space for new growth.
Oh, okay.
And it releases nutrients back into the soil.
Okay.
And some seeds actually need fire to germinate.
Oh, wow. So it's like a reset button.
Yeah, exactly.
So then what happens?
Well, then you have what we call secondary succession.
Secondary succession. Okay.
It's similar to primary succession,
Okay.
but it happens faster
Okay.
because the soil is already there.
So you might see grasses and wildflowers first,
Exactly.
and then the shrubs and the trees.
Yeah, and eventually the oaks and maples might come back.
Okay, wow. So forests are resilient.
They are incredibly resilient.
Yeah. Okay, so succession highlights how dynamic
Right.
and ever-changing forests are.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process.
Yeah, it makes you appreciate them
Yeah.
on a whole other level.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've talked about structure,
Right.
biodiversity,
Yeah.
energy flow, nutrient cycling,
Mhm.
succession.
Yeah.
There's one more thing before we move on.
Okay.
It's this idea of mother trees.
Oh, yeah, mother trees.
That sounds cool. What are those?
So this is groundbreaking research
Okay.
led by Suzanne Simard.
Okay.
It revolutionized our understanding of
Okay.
how trees interact.
Okay.
So trees aren't just passive competitors.
Okay.
They're actually connected
Connected.
Yeah.
Okay.
through these vast underground networks.
Oh, the fungi.
Yeah, the mycorrhizal fungi.
Right. Okay.
And they can actually communicate.
Communicate.
Yeah, they can send messages.
What kind of messages?
Well, they can exchange nutrients.
Oh.
They can send warnings about pests or diseases.
Wow.
And they can even support each other.
Support each other.
Yeah,
So it's like a social network for trees.
it is. It's amazing.
So what are the mother trees?
So mother trees are the largest,
Okay.
oldest,
Yeah.
and most interconnected trees.
So they're like the hubs?
Yeah, they're like the hubs.
Okay.
And they nurture and support the younger trees.
Oh, wow. So they're like the wise elders.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Okay.
They send nutrients to seedlings that are struggling.
Okay.
They warn their neighbors about insect attacks.
Wow.
And they even help injured or dying trees
Wow. How do they do that?
by transferring resources through the network.
Wow. That's incredible. Okay. So they're essential.
Yeah, they're essential for the health of the forest.
Wow. So it's not just about competition. No, it's about cooperation too.
Wow, this changes everything.
It does.
It's
The
amazing.
more we learn about these networks,
Yeah.
the more we realize how important they are.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
Structure, biodiversity, the flow of energy,
Yeah.
nutrients,
Right.
succession,
Yeah.
mother trees.
Amazing, right?
It's a lot,
It is.
but it's fascinating.
It is.
And it feels like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, there's so much more to learn.
But it's amazing how much we've covered.
It is.
So how does all this tie into like conservation efforts?
Well, a great example is sustainable forestry.
Sustainable forestry, okay.
It's all about finding that balance
Okay.
between utilizing forest resources
Right.
and ensuring the long-term health of the ecosystem.
So it's like living in harmony with the forest.
Exactly.
What would that look like in practice?
Well, traditional forestry often focused on maximizing timber yields.
Okay.
So they would do things like clear cutting. Yeah, where they remove all the trees.
Oh, wow.
And that disrupts the mycorrhizal network. So
Right.
it hinders the forest's ability to regenerate.
It's like you're wiping out a whole community.
Exactly.
So sustainable forestry is different.
Yeah, it takes a more holistic approach.
Okay.
So they might do selective logging.
Selective logging.
Yeah, where they only remove certain trees.
So it's more like pruning a garden.
Exactly.
And they
Yeah.
also focus on protecting old growth forests.
Oh, yeah, those are important.
Yeah, they're biodiversity hotspots.
Right.
And they store a lot of carbon.
Okay, what else?
Well, they promote reforestation
Okay.
in degraded areas.
Mm-hmm.
They control invasive species.
Right.
And they work with local communities.
So it's not just ecological.
No, it's social and economic too.
Okay, so it's all connected.
Everything's connected.
We can't talk about forest conservation without talking about climate change.
Yeah, that's the biggest threat.
Right. So what are we seeing?
Well, rising temperatures.
Yeah.
Altered rainfall patterns.
Okay.
Increased droughts and wildfires.
There's a lot.
It's a lot of challenges.
So how do we help forests adapt?
Well, the most important thing is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Right.
That's the root cause.
Okay.
But there are also strategies.
To help them cope.
Yeah, like assisted migration.
Assisted migration. What's that?
Well, it involves moving species
Okay.
to areas where they're more likely to thrive.
Oh, so like to cooler areas.
Exactly.
Right.
And we can also promote genetic diversity
Okay.
so that they have a wider range of traits.
It's like a bigger toolbox.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And we can restore degraded ecosystems.
So making them more resilient.
Exactly.
And all of this has to be done with local communities
Of course.
because they're the ones who know the forests best.
Yeah, they've been stewards for generations.
So it's all about interconnectedness.
It always comes back to that.
So what are your key takeaways?
Well, for me, it's the complexity
Yeah.
and the interconnectedness of forests.
They're not just trees.
No, they're communities.
Yeah.
with all these relationships.
And those mother trees,
Yeah,
they're amazing.
they are.
Cooperation is just as important as competition.
That's a great insight.
And how the energy flows
Yeah.
and the nutrient cycle,
The beautiful system.
that makes you want to protect them.
It does.
And forests are always changing.
Yeah, through succession.
Right? It's like a story unfolding.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up,
Yeah.
what's one final thought
What role do you see yourself playing?
in conservation?
Yeah,
That's a good question.
it is.
I think we can all do something,
Yeah.
whether it's supporting sustainable businesses or
Yeah.
advocating for policies
Yeah.
or just learning more about forests.
Exactly.
Every little bit helps.
It does.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive.
It has.
Thank you for being such a great guide.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time.
Keep exploring.